What is a secret that your family/friends didn't want you to know? Oh, I've got one. I found out in my mid-30s that prior to marrying my father, my mum was a prostitute, confidence trickster, and arsonist. Seriously. She was a prostitute who was recruited in 1952 by a con man to bilk people out of their investment capital in a week and turn black and white photographic negatives into color photographs. We just need capital to develop the machinery scheme. Investors were shown negatives, black and white photographs, and color photos from the same negatives. It didn't occur to them these were merely colorized black and white photos. When the investors gathered to see the wonder they had created, the entire building, the machinery, and all the plans went up in flames. The con man was promptly arrested. So was my mum. She agreed to testify against him in exchange for misdemeanor charges. I had always known that my dad's grandfather committed suicide. I thought he did it 20 years before I was born. That's what I had inferred, anyway. While doing some genealogy research, I found out that nope, he had offed himself about a month after I was named after him. Why was he trying to kill his own son, and why was he allowed to continue after the first attempt? Sorry, so many questions. My dad told us everything about his dad, not one peep about his mom, even though I know she died after his dad did, so it's not like he didn't have memories of her. Abusive, manic, alcoholic drug fiend who played favorites and probably didn't have a sober moment in over half her life. I don't even know her name, but if I even know a tenth of the trauma she's caused, I'm glad I never met her. My dad kept that shit buried until I was nearly 30 and only lightly touched on it. When we were kids and would ask questions, my dad would make up fantastical stories about his childhood. If you've seen Big Fish, you have a pretty good idea of what his stories were like. My dad really wanted the world to be a more magical place where child abuse, addiction, parental rejection, cancer, and mental illness didn't exist, and for a little while, it was for me and my siblings. I found my mom's diary when I was 16. I didn't mean to snoop. I was looking through a bin of old family photos and found it. By the time I realized what it was, I couldn't stop reading. It was the diary she kept when I was 3, when she was in the psych ward after trying to kill herself. That was the first time I went into foster care. The diary was dark and trauma-laced, and she was clearly experiencing psychosis. I still have the diary tucked away almost 15 years later. I never told her that I found it. My mother passed in August. We were estranged for about 10 years. In the box of her personal effects, I found a notebook which contained, I'd guess, a draft of a letter she wrote to my father while pregnant with me. It started out sort of calm, questioning why he won't reach out and the pain of his absence, but by the end, she was always long-winded. It devolved into a sort of screed, her hate seeping through the flowery sentences. I was inside her when she wrote that. Christ. My father did come back but left again around 2 years. Haven't seen him since. I also found a Christmas card she sent to her mother when she was 19. She states she's not coming home for the holiday and that she needs some isolation to process her sins and guilt. She talks about how hopeless and confused she is, that she lacks direction or clarity. I knew she struggled all her life with depression, but it really stunned me she was so desolate at 19. As much as finding that saddened me, it added some perspective to a woman I never really understood, and I have appreciation that I came out of that single-parent household a somewhat functional member of society. My mom went to prison when I was 2 and went insane and doesn't even remember the thing that happened. She lost a baby. They said she killed her on purpose because she wrapped her in a blanket and put her in a crib and went to clean the blood in the bathroom, and I found some letters she sent from inside talking about how sad she was and the terrible things the guards would do to her in there. She begged for years to be relocated, but they never did. Despite what they did, she is the most beautiful and resilient woman I know. She has a type of patience I've never seen before, and my heart breaks because she didn't deserve any of that. I found my mom's journal from when she was 9 and living with my very abusive grandma. My mom wasn't the best mom, but I found out she was never given the tools to be in the first place. It was hard to read. She lived in a constantly shifting reality that never made sense, and all she could do was ride it out. She did a lot less damage to her kids. She really did do her best. My mom was a huge cokehead, and dealt it in clubs, too, in the 80s. Also, my siblings were actually half-siblings from her first marriage. I found out about it by eavesdropping when I was younger, but it wasn't until I was 27 that my mom, due to a long story, had to acknowledge that my dad was her second marriage. I've seen the court documents from her divorce, including those from a drug counselor, about her being huge into cocaine, but she still insists she doesn't even know what it was and feigns ignorance about anything drug-related, down to pretending not to know how to pronounce the words cocaine or marijuana. Pretending not to know how to pronounce the words cocaine or marijuana. How does she pronounce two of the most talked about drugs in the United States? My ex-best friend didn't want me to find out that she was sleeping with a colleague. We worked together and it was against the rules in her contract, but she left her phone out. He was sending her flirty/dirty messages at work and I happened to see them. I wasn't snooping. We did this thing where, when one of us had left our phone out, the other would take a bunch of stupid selfies. All of a sudden I was inundated with messages and it threw me. She eventually removed me from her life and took all our friends with her. For me it's a friend's dad. He left the family when my friend was young but would occasionally send a gift or card. My friend got a Facebook message one day from a woman who had been doing ancestry research. It turns out the dad had done the same thing, get married, have kids, bail, several times, and my friend has a crap load of half-siblings he never knew about. They're all friends now. Okay, like you lost a friend but gained a valuable lesson. Never leave your phone out around someone who likes to take stupid selfies. That's kinda the same situation with my grandpa's father. We just call him the mailman because that was his usual occupation. But he would do the same thing. Have a family, leave them after a few kids and start another one. My family found out long after my grandpa passed, but we think my grandpa has about 7 to 10 half-siblings. Although we won't know the true answer because some of them and their families refuse to speak to us because of the shame they feel around the whole situation. My father married several times. At his funeral, I met 5 half-brothers and 6 half-sisters I didn't know of. Being the firstborn, I was glad to know my mother divorced him in their 3-year marriage. On why? While she was in college she told him to finish college too or else. He dropped out and became a truck driver. He owed her $17,000 in child support. This was back in the early 70s. Your friend might be a cousin of mine. I have an uncle who did this shit. We don't actually even know how many women he married, because he dropped out of sight for years. Some time ago I read the story of a really sad and tragic murder case in a small Italian village. The whole story is absolutely fascinating, but one aspect of this was that as part of the investigation, the entire town ended up allowing themselves to be DNA tested. While this didn't reveal the killer, they made an unexpected discovery that something like 25% of the young adults had fathers who were not who they thought they were. My family never talked about my grandfather. I knew he died before I was born, but that was it. When I was about 15, my mother told me he was a terrible man, used to beat my father and their entire family. Eventually, he tried to axe murder my dad at his work, and somehow my dad fought him off. Next attempt, my grandfather waited with a shotgun to kill my dad when she showed up for work, but my dad was off for some reason. Grandpa eventually got tired of waiting and just killed himself. Apparently my dad just never wanted us to know just how bad life can be, and did everything to keep that buried. I have a very similar family story, though it was my uncle who ended up having to kill his dad, my grandfather, with the gun that grandfather brought into their fight. My dad never talks about it, but I've read newspaper articles about it. That man made their life a living hell. Grandpa eventually got tired of waiting and just killed himself. I don't mean to laugh, but this wording got me. Like, well, I came here to kill someone. Seems like a waste of time otherwise.